The last 3 decades after World War II, the vast majority of Americans did well when the economy did well. This is the percentage of new income that went to the bottom 90%, and this is what the top 10% got. They did okay. 10% did pretty well. They got 20% of all the income. But the bottom 90% got 80% of the income. And then 54 to 57 went down a little bit, but the bottom 90% did pretty well. Bottom 90% did pretty well. Bottom 90% did pretty well. Bottom 90% begins to do less well, but they're still getting a majority of the new income. Whoa! What happens in 1982? Well, Ronald Reagan is president, and the good news is we are into trickle-down economics. And here it is. And this chart tells it all. This is what top 10% got. This is what the bottom 90% got. And here we are in the last number here, where we are today. And lo and behold, the top 10% gets it all.
The Eisenhower tax code built the middle class. The Reagan tax code is the straw that broke the camel's back, destroyed the middle class, and impoverished broad swaths of the American population.
The Reagan administration worked to defang agencies and to staff them with officials who would overlook corporate misbehavior.
Before 1980, this practice was illegal. Letting a company buy its own stock used to be outlawed. U.S. companies announced $171 billion in buybacks just in the first 6 weeks of 2018. Stock buybacks don't help anyone but the richest people in the country. Stock buybacks don't add value to our national economy. Money that could be spent productively on employees is just burned.
I believe my first residual check was $7,000 when it was on network, and the last one I got was $74.
Well, I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, I wrote a successful TV movie. In the ensuing 2 years, we got residuals of over $100,000. If it had been sold to Netflix, I don't know what we would have gotten, but maybe $2,500.
The United States was partially founded to end aristocracy, but rich families are working overtime to bring it back.
Let's use the Declaration of Independence, the US Constitution, and the Bill of Rights to go back to peak middle-class prosperity, obtain economic compensation for tax code and other legislation that harmed the middle class. Let's also make it unconstitutional, which it is, to erode the well-being of the middle class. In other words, middle class can get richer and bigger, but not smaller or poorer. New rule. Both upper and lower chambers of Congress need to establish committees named 3 Unalienable Rights. The first draft Senate bill looks like this. Senate Bill 137, to ensure the economic well-being of middle-class and lower-class Americans, based on the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as outlined in the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, by repealing legislation that adversely impacted their economic interests, establishing a warranty for their economic prosperity, providing compensation for past harm, and implementing measures to prevent future harm. In the Senate of the United States, May 22, 2023, Ms. Warren, for herself, Mr. Booker and Mr. Sanders, introduced the following bill, which was read twice and referred to the Committee on 3 Unalienable Rights, a bill to be cited as the Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness Warranty Act. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, Section 1. Short title. This act shall be cited as the Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness Warranty Act. Section 2. Constitutional basis. The Congress recognizes that the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, specifically expressed by the statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, serve as the fundamental basis for this legislation. The United States Constitution as a whole upholds the principles of individual rights and freedom, establishing the framework for protecting and promoting the economic well-being of all Americans, particularly the majority of Americans who are middle class and lower class. Section 3. Repeal of legislation impacting economic well-being. A. Findings. The Congress finds that the economic well-being of middle class and lower class Americans is essential for upholding the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as outlined in the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. B. Constitutional basis. This act is grounded in the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which recognize the inherent rights and freedoms of all individuals, including economic rights that contribute to their overall well-being. C. Repeal criteria. Past legislation passed into law that has adversely impacted the economic well-being of middle-class and lower-class Americans, including tax legislation, federal agency rule promulgation, and other forms of legislation, shall be subject to repeal. D. Historical impact. The Office of Management and Budget's peak middle-class and lower-class metrics, dating back to the inception of the OMB, shall be utilized as a benchmark for identifying legislation that has hindered or lowered prosperity for these classes. The evaluation shall consider historical data and trends to ensure continuous improvement of prosperity for these classes. E. Repeal process. Upon identifying legislation that has adversely impacted the economic well-being of middle-class and lower-class Americans, as determined by the peak metrics, the affected legislation shall be repealed in its entirety. F. Congressional action. The appropriate committees of jurisdiction shall review the identified legislation for repeal within 90 days of receiving the OMB's report. Section 4. Legislative warranty. A. Guarantee of economic security. This act establishes a legislative warranty to protect the economic security and prosperity of the middle class and lower class American citizens. Legislation and policy changes shall be designed and evaluated to ensure that they do not undermine the economic well-being of these classes, but rather contribute to their improvement and advancement. B. Remedy for past harm. In cases where past legislation or policy changes have caused harm to the middle class and lower class, resulting in economic distress and inequalities, appropriate measures shall be taken to provide remedies, including financial compensation and systemic reforms, to rectify the harm caused and promote economic equity. Section 5. Compensation for past harm. A. Bailout and compensation. In cases where members of the middle class and lower class have suffered economic harm due to past legislation, they shall be eligible for economic compensation to maintain baseline economic health. The compensation shall be determined based on the extent of harm and the peak metrics established by the Office of Management and Budget. B. Funding. The cost of maintaining this legislation, providing compensation for past harm, and implementing the measures outlined in this Act, shall be funded through appropriate tax code legislation that targets revenue from millionaires, billionaires, and multi-billion-dollar corporations, as determined by the Congress. Section 6. Forward-looking OMB review. The Office of Management and Budget shall conduct retroactive reviews and mandatory reviews of proposed legislation to assess its potential impact on the economic well-being of middle-class and lower-class Americans. If identified as harmful, the OMB shall provide recommendations to mitigate adverse effects or prevent the passage of such legislation. Section 7. House sponsors. In the House of Representatives, this bill shall be sponsored by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Jamal Bowman, and Representative Maxwell Frost. Section 8. Severability. If any provision of this Act or any application thereof is found to be unconstitutional, the remainder of the Act shall not be affected thereby. Section 9. Effective date. This Act shall take effect on the first day of the fiscal year following passage of this Act, and shall apply to that fiscal year and thereafter. Please note that this is a draft bill, and may require further review, revisions and input from legal experts and relevant stakeholders before being introduced to Congress.